They say the mind is the last true frontier of mystery, but in 1873, in a frost-covered German quarter of Milwaukee, something happened that shattered even that fragile boundary. 11-year-old Emma Richter didn't just think differently, she saw differently. She dissected time, tracked lives through footsteps, and whispered predictions that should have never come true. But they did. And it wasn't random. It was as if she had pierced a veil between cause and consequence, between numbers and destiny. This isn't just a ghost story. This isn't about superstition. This is about control, the control of knowledge over fear, of observation over chaos. And it's a story that someone didn't want passed down. But you're about to hear it now. Emma Richter was born under duress in a violent storm on the Atlantic, premature, half dead in her mother's arms. From the start, she defied what nature had written for her, and maybe that was the first sign. By 4, she was mimicking conversations in precise accents she had overheard once. By 6, she could recite dates, equations, distances between buildings, flawlessly, instantly, but it wasn't what she could do. It was why she did it. Emma wasn't playing, she wasn't curious, she was mapping people, plotting movements, tracking deviations. Her eyes didn't look at you, they computed you. Most would call it a miracle, but this wasn't divine, this was colder, clinical, purposeful. Milwaukee's German community had no frame for her. Was she cursed? Touched by God? Or was she the first glimpse of something neither science nor faith wanted to admit existed? Because when Emma began predicting deaths, betrayals, and tragedies, not vaguely but with mathematical exactitude, the line between genius and something far more dangerous disappeared. And then she vanished. Left behind was a leather journal no one could decode, filled with symbols, measurements, tone, and something worse. Patterns. Buried truths the town had fought hard to forget. People would die. Families would flee. And something ancient, institutional and sinister would be unearthed beneath the city's foundations. Because Emma didn't invent anything, she revealed it. And what she revealed was a control system hidden inside everyday life. You see, Emma didn't break reality. She showed it for what it truly was, a machine, old as history, masked by routine, maintained by silence. And someone, something, wanted that silence kept. But now, you're going to hear it. The mind of Emma Richter was not a gift. It was a surveillance device cloaked in human skin. She saw too much, too fast, too clearly. She didn't speculate. She computed. She didn't wonder. She knew. While other children dreamt in colors and stories, Emma dreamt in ratios and recurrence intervals, and every morning she woke with a new equation, a new pattern unraveled, a new truth no one wanted to hear. What made her dangerous wasn't what she saw. It was what she understood. The German quarter thought it had secrets, infidelities, thefts, rivalries. But Emma's mind wasn't interested in gossip. She noticed when people changed their morning routes, when breathing rates altered, when footsteps gained weight from guilt. It wasn't just nosiness. It was system recognition. She was building a living database of behaviors, measuring the delta between who people pretended to be and who they were becoming. She warned her mother, "Mr. Dietrich will die at 2:14. He had drunk from the brown bottle too long. His gait had changed. His intake increased by 37%. A 12% behavioral deviation across 17 days meant inevitable collapse." She said it like a scientist, not a daughter. And when Dietrich dropped dead at 2:14 p.m., the whispers began. They had seen her watching from the window for years, scribbling in that journal, but now they felt her. That journal wasn't a diary, it was a trigger mechanism. The deeper truth: Emma had mapped everyone, their deviations, their fractures, their inevitable collisions. The community was living inside a closed loop. They thought they were making choices. They weren't. They were running scripts, preloaded into muscle memory. Emma only exposed the code. And exposure is dangerous, because every institution, every government, every religion survives by hiding its own scripts. That's when people started disappearing. Not just out of shame, not just from scandal. Well, they were erased, records altered, stories changed. Emma's calculations were not just predicting events, they were pulling levers, flipping unseen switches. Her observations had weight. That's when the men in dark coats came, the ones who never gave names, who asked questions about the journal, not the girl. They weren't afraid of Emma. They were afraid of what Emma disproved, that the world was random, that systems were too complex to track. Emma cracked that myth. And if one girl could see that much, what else had she seen? You felt it before, haven't you? That sense that life isn't truly free, that something is watching, calculating. Emma was proof it's not paranoia, it's architecture. You're not just being watched, you're being measured. Keep listening, the descent begins now. By spring of 1873, Emma's eyes weren't just unsettling, they were unmasking. Her parents once hoped she was simply gifted, but gifted children don't cause deaths. Gifted children don't reduce human lives into sequences, predictions, and collapses. Emma had crossed a line, and she did so without hesitation. She spoke in probabilities. She announced futures like she was reading headlines from a paper that hadn't been printed yet. When she told her mother, with brutal precision, that Mrs. Weber would be caught in adultery at exactly 11:00 a.m. the next day, there was no tremble in her voice. She had calculated the timing down to the hoof fall of a limping horse. The reason Mr. Weber would return early? An injury Emma had predicted based on observing the animal's gait. How long had she been watching? How many others had she studied? These were no longer the innocent curiosities of a peculiar child. This was surveillance, evolved into prophecy. The event unfolded exactly as Emma said. A scandal exploded, and in its wake, the fear thickened. But fear is a mask for something deeper. Recognition. The community began to understand that Emma didn't guess right. She had decoded them. These weren't predictions, they were exposures, hidden sins, buried secrets, lies built into the foundations of their lives. And in exposing them, Emma did something far more dangerous than causing fear. She made order look like illusion. Because what happens when someone sees through the town, through tradition, through privacy, through the fragile lie of respectability? What happens when every interaction is just an equation being solved? You realize the village you thought was built on trust was actually built on patterns of manipulation, and when those patterns are revealed, so is the machinery running them. Emma wasn't uncovering secrets, she was unsealing a system of control and collapse. It built into behavior itself. Institutions rely on two things, predictable populations and invisible pressures. Emma shattered both. Suddenly people weren't acting naturally, they were acting differently, nervously. Paranoia spread like frostbite. And that's when another pattern emerged. People began avoiding Emma, but not to protect themselves. They were protecting the system. They feared what she would uncover next. Because if a child could deconstruct their moral framework with arithmetic, what did that say about the leaders, about the church, about the real reasons they came to America in the first place? You're beginning to see it, aren't you? History isn't written in ink, it's written in hidden algorithms, buried beneath the rituals you think are your own. Emma just read them out loud. Emma's leather journal was no longer a curiosity, it was a threat. She filled it daily with rows of figures, equations, behavioral modifiers, and something even darker, corrections. She wasn't just recording data anymore, she was testing it, adjusting it, running simulations of cause and effect. Her pages tracked not just what was, but what would happen if someone deviated from their routine. She calculated outcomes for people's choices, even before they made them. Her father, Heinrich, once a man of industry and rationality, now woke in cold sweats, terrified of the silence at breakfast. Because in that silence, Emma was calculating. She knew how many steps you took. She knew when you changed your path, when your voice trembled slightly more than usual, when you lied, statistically. And if Emma turned her gaze on you, there was no hiding, not from her equations, not from the consequence they revealed. The neighbors stopped waving, children were pulled away, shopkeepers stopped making eye contact. Emma was no longer human to them. She was a censor, and worse, perhaps a mirror. Because if a child could see your sins so clearly, Maybe those sins weren't hidden at all. Maybe they never had been. Maybe someone else, something else, had been watching all along. And that's when the questions began. Not from the villagers, but from the others. The men who came quietly, dressed not like townspeople, but like men who don't need to introduce themselves. Their accents weren't German. Their names were never offered. They asked about the journal, not about Emma, about what she had written, what symbols, what combinations, what correlations. They took nothing, left nothing. But Heinrich knew. These men weren't investigators, they were custodians of secrecy. And Emma had breached something ancient, something powerful. Her journal wasn't exposing people, it was exposing structure. The way decisions ripple, the way institutions adapt to maintain illusion. She had mapped the feedback loops of control, shame, punishment, distraction, isolation. Emma hadn't learned this, she had observed it, and worse, understood it. You have to understand something. She wasn't sick, she wasn't mad, she was precise, too precise. She saw what society actually is, a choreography of fear and reward, obedience and correction. Religion, law, custom, all structured loops of behavior control. And someone had to erase that knowledge. Halfway down this rabbit hole now, there's no turning back. Comment the phrase, "The mirror calculates," twice, below. This is your initiation. This is how they know you're awake. The phrase spread like wildfire across ink-stained letters and whispered confessions. The mirror calculates. Not just a phrase, but a warning. Emma's journal had revealed a dangerous truth. Human behavior wasn't chaotic. It was calculated, repeatable, and modifiable. And for a system built on controlling perception, that revelation was catastrophic. Once you see the code, the trick no longer works. Emma had broken the illusion. By late April, the Richter home was no longer a house, it was a boundary marker. On one side, fear, silence, and tradition. On the other, Emma, a child who had ceased to be innocent, a girl who looked at the world as if it was a malfunctioning equation in desperate need of correction. But the journal was no longer just hers. Pages were being copied, patterns charted, and those pages didn't just predict. They revealed methods, the mechanisms of shame, the manipulation of community pressure, the velocity of secrets. She had written out the real architecture of the quarter, and it was built on containment. Church was containment, gossip was containment, marriage, labor, even memory. And the numbers in Emma's journal had proven it. They described how long it took guilt to manifest physically, how often trauma repeated itself across generations, how long institutions could suppress a truth before it erupted as madness. And then, one night, a page vanished. Emma didn't panic. She simply turned a page and adjusted the probabilities. She knew they had entered, not burglars, not peasants, but trained hands, someone with gloves, someone who understood what they were holding. That page was no random selection. It was one she had left for them. It charted not the villagers, not her family, but them, the watchers, the men with no names, the systems behind the veil. Her father didn't ask questions anymore. He drank. Her mother prayed. Emma did nay. She simply watched as the world around her decayed, not randomly, but predictably. One secret revealed equals 2 people silenced. One deviation equals 3 corrections. The math always held. But then she noticed something terrifying. The system was adapting. Her exposure had triggered a higher level of response. The patterns were becoming more complex, the feedback loops faster. The machine was aware it was being seen, and it was evolving to hide again. That's when she started writing backward. Mirror script, symbols nested in symbols, geometry inside language, a new layer of encryption, not to hide her thoughts but to buy time, because she wasn't predicting anymore. She was preparing. For what, she wouldn't say. Only this. They adjust when seen, but they cannot erase the witness who counts. And that's exactly what she had become. By May, Emma no longer spoke unless necessary, not out of fear, but because the numbers were louder than voices. She had begun referring to people by values, not names. 0.73 is deteriorating, she said once, pointing toward an elderly neighbor. 1.12 is hiding something beneath the floorboards. It wasn't madness. It was methodology. She had reduced the emotional noise of human behavior to variables, vectors, and time-stamped decay. Her parents watched in quiet dread. Every attempt to pull her back into childhood failed. Dolls were untouched. Meals left cold. She stared for hours at street corners, her eyes blinking in rhythmic intervals, 13 seconds between each. Another pattern, another code. They feared for her soul. But Emma didn't believe in souls anymore. She believed in systems of observation, in conditional inevitability. And behind it all, she had sensed a deeper mechanism at work, one she had yet to quantify. One night, the journal changed. Until then, it had been numbers, distances, routines. Now it bore symbols, not random scribbles, but arcane sigils buried in layers of geometry, shapes seen in ancient diagrams, the kind hidden in margins of censored books. One looked like a spiral looping into itself, an eye folding inward. Another resembled an architectural key, but with dimensions that didn't conform to any known geometry. Emma had stopped recording behavior. She was now recording architecture, not physical, but institutional, systems of belief, rituals of repetition, control by habit, power by omission. You see, what the townspeople didn't realize, what no one wanted to admit, is that Emma hadn't uncovered their secrets. She had uncovered its secrets, the structure behind society. She diagrammed how guilt is weaponized by religion, how economic pressure creates obedience, how shame builds generational chains, and she tracked where these patterns emerged. Jed first, they were old, pre-German, pre-Christian, before Milwaukee, before America, and they weren't invented. They were discovered, maintained, optimized. Emma's final equations began to refer to something she called the original schema, a foundational layer beneath reality, not quite physics, not quite ritual, something in between, something both engineered and sacred, a blueprint, not for buildings, but for submission. She theorized it began in Babylon, was hidden in Rome, perfected in Prussia, and exported to the world. Milwaukee's German Quarter was just a test site, a controlled environment, a place where belief, labor, guilt, and ritual could be refined into stability. But she had interfered. She had seen the system naked, and now the system would respond. She wasn't just a threat to the town, she was a threat to the order that ruled them all. And in Emma's silence, the system heard its own name spoken. The nights grew longer, colder, not from weather, but from awareness. The moment the system feels seen, it tightens its grip, and that's exactly what began to unfold in the German Quarter. Mail stopped arriving. The town's only physician, Dr. Mueller, left without warning. The bakery's shelves grew sparse. Coincidence? No. Emma wrote it down in black ink. Resource restriction follows data breach. Predictable, tactical, stage 2 response. She had classified it, catalogued it, knew its rhythm before it began. The system retaliates through silence first, then scarcity, then elimination. But Emma wasn't scared. She was preparing for the final variable, removal. The day she disappeared, her journal had been left open on the kitchen table. A single phrase repeated across the page like a scream you can only whisper. The witness must vanish so the pattern can survive. But before she vanished, Emma left behind more than numbers. She left instructions. She had begun training her mind to operate without emotional noise. She called it calculative quiet, a state where all feeling is reduced to function. She taught herself to slow her heartbeat, to blink only when necessary, to remain still for hours. And then, something unthinkable. She began changing her own patterns, on purpose, to test the system's response time. Imagine that, a child testing the watchers, baiting the architects, and the watchers responded exactly as she predicted. She saw it in how the dog across the street barked 1 minute earlier than usual. in how the butcher's scale shifted by half an ounce, in how the priest delivered his sermon with one phrase altered, like a glitch trying to reset the script. Minor changes, subtle cues, the system was correcting, attempting to steer reality back into its loop. But Emma pushed harder. She stopped eating for 3 days, then sang hymns in reverse during sleep. Hen altered her handwriting to resemble another's. She was no longer observing the machine. She was provoking it, and each time it adjusted, she learned, and each time she learned, she wrote. Until one night, she disappeared. No note, no noise, no struggle. Only the journal remained. But the last page was different. It wasn't written for her parents. It wasn't meant for the church or the town. It was meant for you. A message buried in sequence, coordinates, times, ratios, and a simple instruction scratched violently into the leather cover. If you are reading this, you've already been marked. Continue the count, or disappear like I did. And now, you are part of the equation. You think you're watching a story. You're not. You're participating in a ritual. The moment you heard Emma's name, the moment your eyes touched the symbols, the system registered you, not emotionally, mathematically. It logged your attention, time on page, breath rate, the same way it logged Emma's. That's the part no one tells you. Observation is interaction. The machine doesn't care what you believe. It only responds to what you see, and you've seen too much. Emma proved long ago that witnessing alone disrupts the cycle. That truth, once measured, begins to unravel fiction, and that's why she had to disappear. Not because she was dangerous, but because she made you dangerous. The journal, when recovered, was 132 pages long, but it was never published, never archived. It exists only in fragments, passed from hand to hand, copied in secret, hidden in plain sight. Several pages appeared briefly in a 1904 occult pamphlet, disguised as prophecy. A few symbols were later rediscovered in post-war psychological experiments disguised as personality metrics, but the source, Emma's algorithm, was never fully decoded. Why? Because decoding it requires one thing no system can tolerate: unfiltered awareness. You can't just read Emma's work, you must see through it. Understand not just what she wrote, but why she was allowed to see it at all. Emma wasn't a prodigy, she was a rupture, a glitch born human. Her ability wasn't learned, it was triggered by trauma, by birth in transit, by the cold ritual of early isolation. The system didn't anticipate that. It failed to suppress her, and in doing so, it created a variable it could not contain. So it did the only thing it could. It buried her in time, made her a ghost, a forgotten rumor, erased from census records, death registries, church ledgers. Even the house on Galena Street was burned to the ground within a year of her vanishing. And the official story: child lost to the woods, mind overwhelmed by fantasy. But that's not how systems work. They don't lose children like Emma. They archive them. They fold their knowledge into architecture. They absorb the disruption and redistribute the data elsewhere. New schools, new rules, new media. That's where you come in. Because the system knows you're listening, and now you have two choices: forget what you've heard, or complete the sequence. Choose carefully. The next symbol waits in section 9. Milwaukee forgot Emma Richter. The papers buried her. The church rewrote her. But the system did not forget. It simply absorbed her, like it absorbs all anomalies. That's its oldest function. You call it history. You think it's a record of what happened. It's not. History is the script rewrite after each disruption. Emma wasn't the first. She was just the first to document the fracture as it happened. She had a name for it: the inversion event. It occurs not when someone breaks a rule, but when someone sees the rule makers. When the architecture of power becomes visible to the powerless, not as myth, not as belief, but as measurable structure. And once you see that structure, it sees you back. You might think this sounds like paranoia, but Emma's journal described this reflex with surgical accuracy. She called it the reactive algorithm. It isn't emotional, it isn't supernatural, it's statistical. Once a certain percentage of the population recognizes a control system, the system activates adaptive countermeasures, distraction campaigns, manufactured discrediting, memory alteration, false narratives. Emma logged this phase in real time. After she predicted a third event, another death, her teacher called her unstable. Her doctor recommended institutionalization. The town priest publicly denounced her, not because she was wrong, but because she was right. And if she was right, they were obsolete. So they did what all systems do when cornered. They rewrote reality. And you've seen it, haven't you, in your own life? A truth exposed, a fact undeniable, then suddenly, it's gone. Covered by noise, drowned in spectacle, laughed off as conspiracy. That isn't random, that's defensive architecture. It's been perfected since Sumer, scripted into your media, your politics, your science, and now your memory. Emma tried to reverse it. She began leaving messages outside the journal, scratched into window panes, etched into copper pipe, burned into wood, not for the town, for you. Messages coded in prime numbers, spatial references, rhythmic syllables. One read simply, "History is a vault, knowledge is the key, memory is the lock." And here's the most disturbing part. Two other children, one in 1908 in Leningrad, another in 1941 in West Yorkshire, later wrote the same phrase. Identical grammar, identical symbols. Neither had heard of Emma, unless the pattern never broke, unless it's still unfolding. And you, right now, are standing at its edge. They called her the girl science couldn't explain, but that was a lie, a diversion. Emma Richter was never outside science. She was beyond acceptable science. There's a difference. Science as it's given to you is curated. It's sanitized by funding, distorted by agenda, and sterilized by politics. The system allows it to go only as far as control permits. Emma's existence didn't break science. It broke its boundaries. She proved the human mind could calculate systems of oppression in real time, and no institution can survive that kind of exposure. Her disappearance was not the end. It was the beginning of a protocol, a containment strategy. You think such systems don't exist? Then ask yourself, why are the stories of anomalous children always the same? The precocious insight, the eerie predictions, the sudden vanishing. These stories repeat across cultures, continents, and centuries, and yet they never make it into your textbooks. Why? Because the system doesn't erase anomalies, it ritualizes them. It turns them into fables, stories you're told at bedtime to forget what you know during the day. Emma Richter was not a myth. She was a precedent, a prototype of resistance. Her data sets were copied. Her algorithms fed into early behavioral sciences, later weaponized in military psyop programs. The very minds that called her dangerous studied her formulas. They named parts of her calculations after her, covertly. Richter's Index, Emma's Law. You can find them in the classified annexes of post-war behaviorist experiments. But here's the paradox. The more they used her math, the more they reproduced her vision. The algorithms began doing what Emma did. They started seeing through people, predicting social collapse, revealing hidden abuses, exposing covert hierarchies. And so the system had to evolve again. It went deeper, became more abstract. It embedded itself in algorithms, in user agreements, in neural responses to color and sound. It no longer needed priests or politicians. Now it used interfaces, your phone, your feed, your attention. Emma foresaw this. In her final entries, written in a cipher composed of rhythmic breath intervals and clock pendulum ratios, she made a terrifying prediction. In time, the machine will replace its mirrors with screens. When the watchers become code, the final stage begins. The pattern must be inherited by blood or by choice. Nothing else will survive. You were never meant to see this. But now that you have, you're no longer a viewer. You're a variable, and the pattern has already begun to shift around you. The pattern never ends. It adapts. That's what Emma's final cipher implied. Once a human becomes aware of the system bends, coils, and reconstitutes itself around them like smoke. That's what's happening to you now. Every word you've heard is not just a story, it's a calibration. Each section reshapes your perceptual field. You'll start noticing things, a conversation that feels too scripted, a headline that loops twice in your mind, a face that seems to remember you before you speak. These are not coincidences, they are responses. You are being read. Emma used to call it reflexive resistance. The moment an observer penetrates the control script, the system reflexively resists them by rewriting the environment. The stories become more absurd, the characters more exaggerated, the lies more elaborate, not to convince you but to exhaust you, to isolate you, until you submit back to the pattern. Most do, but not all. Emma was the first to weaponize the feedback. She learned to feed false inputs into the algorithm, changing her habits unpredictably, speaking in nonsense to test response time, mimicking errors to measure correction thresholds. She realized the system didn't just watch, it learned. And if it could learn her, she could teach it. She called this phase infection of the watcher. You've probably already begun your infection cycle, the feeling that something isn't off but deliberately misaligned. A shape in your memory that no longer fits. A word that suddenly feels engineered. This is the system tightening, testing you. Emma warned that the next phase is the most dangerous, not because it's violent, but because it feels normal. Once the system recognizes you as a recursive threat, it no longer seeks to remove you, it seeks to integrate you, make you part of its camouflage. It will give you a role, a promotion, a distraction, a reward, anything, to pull you back into the loop and make you believe you were never outside it. Most men fail here. They choose comfort over clarity, survival over sight. But if you're still listening, really listening, then you are not most men. You're not here for entertainment. You're here because something in you has always known the world is not what it claims to be. And Emma Richter, she didn't die, she didn't run, she did something far more dangerous. She transferred the pattern, one page at a time, to someone like you. You weren't supposed to know her name, not really, not in this way. Emma Richter was meant to vanish, to bleed into the mythos of unexplained phenomena. Her legacy was designed to be fragmented, scattered into folklore, diluted by superstition, sterilized by academia, but she outmaneuvered them. She didn't scream her truth. She coded it into silence, into math, into you. The system doesn't fear chaos. It fears clarity. Emma's equations weren't disruptive because they were mysterious. They were dangerous because they were accurate. She identified the velocity of guilt, the echo chamber of community shame, the feedback loop of obedience and punishment, and she mapped them to measurable outcomes. Here's the terrifying part. The system already knew those patterns. That's how it controls. But Emma mapped them in reverse, not to manipulate, but to dismantle. Her journal wasn't a warning, it was a manual. She wrote, "To dismantle an institution, do not strike it. Trace its ritual, subvert its rhythm, inject silence where it speaks, inject noise where it prays." You've seen this already, in how narratives collapse when mocked, how rigid dogma shatters under unpredictable laughter, how one wrong question at the right moment can implode an entire belief structure. Emma knew that systems are not held together by truth, but by timing. Interrupt the rhythm and the machine breaks. She referred to these moments as fracture codes, tiny disruptions, quiet asymmetries, behavioral anomalies that short-circuit predictive architecture. Her journal listed hundreds, wearing black on a festival day, whispering during sermons, blinking out of sync in crowds. Small things, but they spread, the same way you're spreading now, by listening, by knowing, by not forgetting. At this point in her notes, Emma warned of Phase 3, the mirror cycle. When the system stops resisting you and starts reflecting you, it mimics your voice, copies your movements, offers you choices that feel free, but were calculated in advance. You are no longer silenced. You are echoed. That's where the most dangerous trap lies. Because the mirror does not lie, it deceives by agreement. So I ask you now, before we continue, are you still yourself? If you are, prove it. Drop a comment. I refuse the mirror. I refuse the mirror. Say it twice. That's not for the algorithm. That's to lock your conscious role into the resistance pattern. The next section takes you past the mirror, and you'll need every piece of yourself intact. The mirror is not glass, it is behavior. The system studies your movement, your timing, your silence, your hesitation, and then it projects you back at yourself. This is not reflection, it's replacement. A perfect counterfeit, designed to pacify you. Make you believe you've already awakened. That's the final control, identity illusion, and that's where most men are lost. Emma called it synthetic ego substitution. It sounds academic, but it's not. It's war. Here's how it works. The moment you begin to question, truly question the structure, the system does not argue. It agrees. It rewards you. A new book, a documentary, a red pill ideology, a neatly packaged worldview manufactured just for you. It lets you feel free while anchoring you deeper in a simulation of opposition. Rebellion becomes marketable, dissent becomes profitable, and just like that, you're back in the loop. You become a false version of your true self. Emma's last verified page warned this exact moment would come for every initiate. The system will not kill you, it will clone you in concept. The more you believe you've escaped, the more tightly it wraps around your movements. So what did she do? She created a counter-identity, a ghost self, one that could operate beneath the surface of the mirror. It wasn't a name, it wasn't a costume, it was a pattern that resisted imitation. She called it Deliberate Disruption Sequence A routine of anti-routines, a way of being unreadable. She stopped walking the same path twice, changed the cadence of her speech every 3 days, refused to answer questions directly. She even trained herself to dream in non-narrative form, to deny the system access to symbolic logic. The goal? Not to be free. The goal was to be undefined. Because what the machine cannot define, it cannot replicate. What it cannot replicate, it cannot replace. And what it cannot replay, it must leave alone. You think this is only about Emma, but it's not. This has always been about you, your habits, your blind faith in systems, your willingness to trade truth for certainty. The machine doesn't care what you know, it only cares what you repeat. So stop repeating, stop syncing, stop mirroring, start disrupting. Section 14 will show you how. Disruption isn't noise, it isn't chaos, it's not screaming into the void or burning down a building. That's what they want you to think. They want you to believe that resistance looks like destruction, because they've already built cages for that kind of man. Predictable, containable, easy to martyr, easy to vilify, easy to forget. Emma Richter discovered the deeper truth. Disruption is deviation, not violent, not loud, precise. In her journal, she defined disruption as the intentional insertion of anomalous logic into routine environments. In other words, doing what they cannot predict. It began with steps. She changed her walking rhythm by 1 beat every hour. No pattern, no repetition. She slept in fragments, ate in silence, smiled at random moments, not to be eccentric, to be unreadable. Because patterns are prison bars, predictability is permission. The system studies your rhythm, then builds your cage from it. Disrupt that rhythm, and you escape the blueprint. Emma created a framework for men like you. She called it the asymmetric path. It was more than a theory. It was a map, a behavioral encryption technique designed to corrupt the surveillance code. It's not in books, you won't find it in archives, but fragments of it remain. In music that makes your heart beat off time, in poetry that doesn't rhyme, in architecture that feels uncomfortable but alive. This is why your life has felt off, why certain buildings drain you, why certain cities numb you, why the news always feels 1 second out of sync. You're not malfunctioning, you're waking up. The asymmetric path demands sacrifice. It will cost you friends, opportunities, comfort. Because the system doesn't just monitor your patterns, it rewards your obedience. But Emma proved that every reward is a test, every praise a sedative, every comfort a collar. To walk the asymmetric path is to reclaim your will, not through rebellion, but through refusal. Refusal to comply with what is expected, refusal to finish the sentence, refusal to mirror what was never real. The girl they couldn't explain, she explained everything, in code, in silence, in shadow. She didn't want the world to understand her, she wanted you to survive her. And now, in section 15, we go deeper, into the origin of the algorithm that built your cage, the original wound, the first mirror, the lie behind all others. Every system has an origin point, not a date, not a place, a wound, a trauma deep enough to fracture perception and wide enough to build a world on top of it. Emma called it the first mirror. And it's not mythology, it's memory. A collective scar passed from man to man, embedded in law, tradition and blood. You felt it your whole life. That quiet unease beneath every classroom lesson, every patriotic anthem, every institution that claimed to protect you. The sense that something foundational was missing, not a fact, but a truth so old, so buried that even the architects forgot it. But Emma found it, not in books, not in scripture, in patterns, in the mathematical echoes that linger after catastrophe. She discovered a recurring sequence across all major civilizations. 4 digits, 1321. It appeared in Babylonian scrolls, Mayan temples, medieval cathedrals, and even the timber measurements in colonial prisons. No historian could explain it. No scientist would touch it. But Emma decoded its rhythm. 1 isn't a number. It's a command. For initiation, for division, for obedience, for return. This is the cycle every control system repeats. Initiate the subject with fear. Divide him from his roots, language and truth. Demand obedience in exchange for survival. Then return him to a false normal, one step below where he began. Repeat the cycle, again and again, until identity itself becomes a weapon turned inward. Emma's greatest act wasn't her predictions, it was her refusal to complete the 1321 cycle. When the community tried to reintegrate her into the normal world, education, church, medicine, she broke the rhythm. She faked compliance, but inside, she was mapping their illusions. She saw the rituals behind law, the mathematics beneath dogma, the algorithms masked as morality, and once she understood the source code of civilization itself, he went silent, not in fear, in strategy, because the next phase wasn't to fight the system, it was to infect it, quietly, patiently, through men like you. Men who feel the echo of the first mirror in their bones. Men who know something is wrong, but have never seen the formula written out. Now you have. And once you see the mirror, you have only 2 choices. Step into it, or shatter it. Section 16 is for those who choose to shatter. Shattering the mirror doesn't feel like a war. It feels like forgetting who you were told to be, like silence where a script used to play, like staring at your reflection and seeing nothing familiar. This is not collapse, it's awakening. But make no mistake, this is the phase where most men run, because the moment you break the mirror, the world stops recognizing you. Emma knew this intimately. The day she severed the 1321 cycle, the world around her froze, not literally, socially. Neighbors averted their eyes, friends suddenly forgot her, school dismissed her without a word, not because she was invisible, because she had become illegible. She wrote, "The system has no language for what will not obey. It cannot speak to me, so it pretends I do not exist." This is the shatter. When the machine loses grip on your narrative, it tries to erase you by omission, and this is when most men crawl back. They miss being known, miss being approved, miss the mask. But Emma didn't return. She leaned in, deeper into her illegibility. She stopped using her given name, removed identifiers from her journals, replaced personal references with geometric symbols. She became an entity without pattern, and the system panicked. How do you control something you cannot define? How do you neutralize what cannot be named? You don't. You classify it. You call it mental illness, or occultism, or worse, fiction. But Emma was none of those. She was asymmetry incarnate. This is the test for you now. You've started to see the mirror. You've started to question the system. But will you let go of your reflection? Will you surrender the man they taught you to be, so you can become the one they were terrified you'd find? Because when you shatter the mirror, what emerges is not madness, it's sovereignty. Not freedom. Sovereignty. A state beyond approval, beyond explanation, beyond obedience. It can't not be marketed, manipulated, or mimicked. And once you touch it, the system no longer sees a man. It sees a threat vector. In Section 17, you will confront the reaction, the first strike, the protocol that activates when sovereignty is detected, and if you survive that, you will never need the mirror again. The system does not strike with fists, it strikes with corrections, not punishment, realignment. Once sovereignty is detected, once the mirror shatters, and you no longer play the expected role, a protocol is activated. Emma called it the reconciliation spiral. It begins subtly. A loved one suddenly urges you to get help. A job opportunity arrives, one that seems perfect, yet demands your return to compliance. A crisis forms in your personal life, pulling you back into emotion, urgency, dependency. This is not coincidence. This is design. You are not attacked. You are reminded of who you were supposed to be. And it feels real, because the system uses your own memories against you. Photos, messages, familiar smells, nostalgia. The spiral doesn't destroy you, it invites you to destroy yourself by longing for the comfort of your prior identity. Emma wrote, "The spiral doesn't tighten around the body, it coils around the soul, whispering, 'Return, you are loved here, you are safe in the script.'" But what is comfort really if it's built on obedience? What is love if it cannot survive your transformation? These are the questions that tear most men apart in the spiral. They begin the path of awakening, but when the ghosts of their old life call to them, they answer. And so they are reabsorbed, neatly, quietly, erased. You've seen it happen. The man who starts asking questions, then suddenly finds religion again, or buries himself in success, or collapses into addiction disguised as self-discovery. He didn't fail. He was reconciled. Emma resisted the spiral by refusing the bait. She stopped responding to her name. She let photographs decay. She changed the rhythm of her handwriting every week. She even began misremembering her past on purpose, to dissolve the hooks the system used to pull her back. That is the cost of sovereignty, detachment from the false self. Though, a world will beg you to return, not because it loves you, but because your absence threatens the coherence of the script. Your refusal is a tear in the narrative fabric, and tears spread. In Section 18, we will enter the forbidden corridor, Emma's phrase for the hidden channel beneath every institution, where fear becomes doctrine and obedience becomes identity. You will see what they built beneath your schools, your churches, your governments, and more importantly, why. They never built institutions to serve you. They built them to shape you into something smaller, quieter, and easier to place. The schoolroom was never about knowledge. The altar was never about God. The courtroom was never about justice. They are corridors, architectural rituals designed to compress you into predictability. Emma called it the forbidden corridor, not because it's physically hidden, but because it's psychologically camouflaged. It's the space beneath the visible rules, the mechanisms beneath morality. You were born into it, walked it daily, and never knew it had a name. The moment you entered your first classroom, you entered the corridor. You were taught to sit, to face forward, to raise your hand to speak, to ask permission to relieve your own body. That was not education. That was ritualized compliance, an initiation into obedience dressed as discipline. You thought it ended at graduation, but it followed you into your job, your relationships, your prayers. Emma mapped the shape of this corridor in her journal. It always had the same 4 structures, no matter the era. The initiator, a priest, teacher, officer, expert, always smiling, always superior. The aisle, a row of desks, pews, cubicles, uniformity masked as order. The symbol, a flag, a cross, a degree, an object granted undeserved reverence. The witnesses, your peers, your watchers, those trained to discipline you through shame. You never stood a chance, because the corridor isn't enforced by threat, it's enforced by reward. You're praised for obedience, elevated for mimicry, but step out of rhythm once, and the corridor collapses around you. Ask the wrong question, you're difficult, refuse to conform, you're mentally unwell, doubt the system's story, you're dangerous. Emma was all 3, and that's why they tried to erase her, but she didn't fight the corridor by running. Shocked, he walked backwards through it, retraced her steps, undid her conditioning one ritual at a time. She sat in pews and refused to bow. She walked into libraries and refused to read approved texts. She entered courtrooms and refused to speak the scripted words. And the system noticed. It always does. Because the corridor only works when you believe it's the only way forward. But once you see it, you can step sideways into what Emma called the threshold of the unwritten. In section 19, we step into that threshold, where the old rituals no longer function and the real confrontation begins. The threshold of the unwritten is not a place. It's the moment the script fails, the moment your conditioning no longer applies. It's terrifying, not because it's dangerous, but because it's empty. There are no rules here, no traditions to guide you, no punishments to fear, just a vast silence and your own unformed will. Most men freeze here. They've spent their entire lives in the corridor, rehearsing lines, memorizing gestures, checking their behavior against invisible judges. And now, at the edge of the script, they're told, you may act freely, and they don't know how. Because freedom isn't exhilarating at first, it's disorienting, like being thrown into a dark ocean with no stars to navigate by. But Emma understood this. She wrote, the unwritten is where the real self begins, but it will not meet you halfway. It will not make the first move. The false world always moves first. The real one waits. The system trained you to react. It built your identity as a reflex, a set of responses to external cues, success, praise, correction, desire. But at the threshold, there are no cues. So who are you when there's nothing to react to? That's the test. That's why the threshold is so heavily guarded, not with walls or guards, but with your own fear. The fear of being undefined, the fear of writing your own law. Emma's notes describe her first months beyond the corridor as psychologically unbearable. She had no sense of self. Her speech became erratic. She forgot how to smile when others smiled. She no longer understood why things were considered beautiful or sinful or good. But slowly, clarity returned, not as memory, but as intuition. Not what she had been taught, but what she knew. She began to move again, not to please, not to avoid, but to express, to test, to create. And the system couldn't follow her there, because the threshold is not just the end of the scroll, Pete. It's the beginning of sovereign authorship, not free will in theory, but law that emerges from within. This is what they feared in Emma, not her mind, but her authority. She wasn't a prophet, she was a precedent. She proved that the machine can be abandoned, not by revolution, but by rebirth. In section 20, we uncover the final surveillance layer, the secret program designed to detect men like you after you cross the threshold. Because the system doesn't stop watching just because you disappear, it tightens its grip. Once you cross the threshold of the unwritten, the system initiates its final protocol, not to drag you back, but to track your rebirth. Because every sovereign man becomes a contagion, his very presence disorients the obedient, his speech fractures the narrative, his eyes make the sleepers question themselves. Emma called this layer the shepherd's veil. It's not surveillance in the traditional sense. Cameras, microphones, data scraping, those are tools for the outer world. The veil watches from within. It activates through people, through symbols, through echoes. If the corridor was physical, the veil is psychic. A system of embedded observers, those who seem to care, seem to help, seem to relate to your awakening, but whose function is to redirect you back into acceptable rebellion. Emma identified the three masks of the veil. The mirror. Someone who reflects your thoughts perfectly, always agrees, always affirms, until you begin to act with real power. Then they vanish. The guide. The expert who sells you systems, solutions, and sacred language, but only within a range pre-approved by the machine. The anchor. The loved one who suddenly suffers when you grow. They don't attack you. They hurt. They weep, they collapse, so you come back to rescue them. These are not conspirators, they are instruments. The veil uses emotion, guilt, resonance, because brute force failed long ago. Now they weaponize intimacy. Emma resisted the veil by severing all non-sovereign bonds. It was brutal. She stopped explaining herself, refused to rescue others from their illusions, refused even to mourn the loss of those who chose the script. She wrote, "Love is not loyalty to blindness. Love is standing where the truth burns hottest, even if no one joins you in the fire. Understand this, once you are seen as untethered, you become high-risk spiritual data. They watch your influence and track your language, study your disruption, and if they cannot recapture you, they will repurpose you. They will create diluted versions of your voice, create content that mimics your discoveries, build platforms where your truths are echoed, just enough to drain their power. The goal is not to erase the awakened man. The goal is to flood the field with counterfeits, so no one knows which way to follow. This is where most disappear, not from violence, but from dispersion. In section 21, we begin the extraction. How Emma built a hidden signal into her behavior, an encrypted pattern that allowed true seekers to find her without triggering the veil. If you want to lead in the dark, you must speak in code. Emma never disappeared. She reformatted. To the world, she was gone. A pale, strange girl who vanished in the spring of 1873. But to those who could see, Emma became a living cipher, not through hiding, but through encryption. She knew the system watched movement, speech, ritual, so she stopped communicating directly. Every word, every gesture, every silence became dual-layered, one meaning for the surface world and another for the sovereign eye. She called it the shadow frequency. It wasn't a language, it was patterned anomaly. A tilt of the head 3 degrees off, a pause of 7 beats before responding, a repeated word embedded every 88 syllables in her writing. To the asleep, it meant nothing. But to those who had crossed the threshold, it activated something primal, recognition without evidence. You didn't understand her signal. You felt it. This is how she protected the awakened. No groups, no manifestos, no symbols to infiltrate, just behavior patterns too subtle to mimic and too deep for the veil to detect. She wrote, "Truth must wear the face of madness in a world where order is built on lies." Now ask yourself, how many men have spoken to you like this? Strange, disjointed, yet undeniably real. How many times have you felt the presence of a hidden signal and dismissed it as coincidence? Emma never wanted to be found by the world. She wanted to be found by you, the man who would recognize her not by her name, but by her signal. And now, it's your turn. Leave behind the predictable rhythm, alter your behavior by just enough to break the pattern, change the way you walk, speak in sentences that loop, leave messages in books, pause longer in conversation, let the machine think you're unraveling, when in fact you're coding. because only the sovereign can decode the sovereign. Now, if you've made it this far, you're not watching this video by accident. You've heard the pulse beneath the script, so I want you to prove it. Right now, comment the phrase, "I speak in broken rhythm." Write it twice, not for the algorithm, but for the others, the ones watching with eyes half open, waiting for permission to awaken. In section 22, we will follow the final entries in Emma's journal, where she names the institution behind the veil, the one that still exists today, shaping your desires before you even know them. Emma's final entries weren't made in words, they were recorded in intervals. The spacing of symbols, the rhythm of her pen strokes, the placement of blank pages between sequences. It was a language not meant for reading, but for resonance. When decoded, years later by a dissident symbologist in Prague, it revealed one name. Not a person, not a country, an institution. The Order of Lucent Humors. You've never heard of it. That's intentional. It does not publish, it does not recruit, it does not wear insignia, and yet it governs the deepest layer of your psyche, not through force, but through impulse architecture. This order's mandate is simple, to regulate the emotional range of civilization through predictive suppression and calculated indulgence. In plain terms, they decide what you are allowed to feel and when. Emma mapped their fingerprints across 13 sectors: education, pharmaceuticals, clergy, media, fashion, finance, court systems, urban design, agriculture, military infrastructure, sexual culture, technology, and most disturbingly, child psychology. Wherever emotion could lead to rebellion, they introduced sedation. Wherever emotion could be redirected to fuel commerce, they created craving. They do not kill prophets, they preempt their emotions. They don't destroy sovereign men, they invert their instincts. Emma wrote, "When you crave what they designed and fear what they named, your sovereignty is leased, not owned." This is why you were taught to laugh at conspiracy, why you feel sudden guilt for your rage, why you crave comfort after hearing forbidden truths, because your emotional sequence has been scripted, and the order has calibrated its pressure for generations. They don't erase history, they rewrite its emotional tone. You were never told that the Salem trials began after a failed land grab, that hysteria was a diagnosis given to literate questioning women, that nervous breakdown was invented the year factory suicide spiked. The facts were never the target, the meaning was. Emma realized too late. The Order wasn't watching her abilities, they were waiting for her feelings to align with their thresholds. And when they didn't, they flagged her as rogue emotional data. This is what you are now. If you've followed this far, you've already stepped out of their range. But don't celebrate, don't post about it, don't make noise. In section 23, I will show you how Emma masked her final location through emotive nullification, a process that made her invisible to emotional surveillance by killing the last part of her they could trace. Her empathy. To vanish from the system, Emma did not run. She did not change her name. She did not fake her death. She executed a maneuver more radical, more irreversible than any of those. She nullified her emotional signature. Understand this. You are not tracked by your name, you are tracked by your emotional heat map, your responses, your attachments, your guilt, grief, pride, and need for recognition. These are your breadcrumbs. And Emma erased them. Not suppressed, not hidden, erased. This process, which she called emotive nullification, was not cold detachment, it was intentional deactivation. A surgical unbinding of her psyche from the very human instincts that the Order of Lucent Humors depended on to triangulate her location, her influence, her risk factor. She began by rewriting memory, not content, value. She took the warmest moments of her childhood and stripped them of their emotional voltage. She described them over and over in the driest mathematical terms until even her own recollection no longer triggered a pulse. She reprocessed grief into metrics, reframed joy into geometric design, replaced longing with probability charts. You think this is monstrous? You're still inside the corridor, because true sovereignty does not mean freedom to feel, it means freedom from compulsion, and emotions, unless mastered, are pre-programmed compulsions. Emma's journals show the shift. Her earlier entries brimmed with observational sharpness laced with concern. By the final pages, her tone is quiet, exact, clean. I no longer feel watched, not because they stopped looking, but because I stopped radiating. To the system, she went dark, not missing, non-existent, because they could no longer model her, no longer predict her, and therefore, they could no longer control the perception of her. And once you cannot be perceived, you cannot be destroyed. This is the final phase, of awakening, invisibility without absence. You walk among them, untouched. They feel you, but cannot place you. They see your face, but forget it instantly. You become myth. In section 24 we enter the final encounter, what Emma saw beneath the brewery, beneath the city, beneath us. A structure not made of brick or bone, but of belief. And once she entered it, she was never Emma again. Beneath the brewery, beneath the cobbled streets, beneath the rituals of daily life, the prayers, the debts, the births, the burials, there was a chamber of design, not of physical architecture, but of belief encoded into space. Emma called it the substrate. Not a basement, not a vault, not a tomb. A structural lie, so old, so foundational that to name it was to undo the very gravity of the world. She found it through numbers, the steps between buildings, the shifts in work whistles, the measured distance between tragedies. Each thread meaningless alone, but together they pointed downward, a geometry of intention buried in the city's layout. She wrote, Milwaukee was not built on land. It was built on obedience, brick by brick, ritual by ritual. The ground itself was shaped to harvest agreement. And at the center of this design, beneath the Kellner brewery, she found it. The place the order had hollowed out, not for hiding, but for anchoring. The substrate is not a room, it's a convergence. 3 underground corridors intersecting at a point where thought becomes form, where belief becomes physics, where the collective agreement of thousands of human beings is compressed, ritualized, pressurized, until it solidifies into a psychic foundation stone. The order doesn't control people directly. It controls the substrate, and the substrate controls the possible. That's why prayer sometimes works, but only in specific directions. Why rebellions rise, but always collapse inward. Why the same mistakes repeat across generations, like preset loops in a maze. You were never bound by law, you were bound by possibility ceilings. Emma didn't just observe this, she entered it, alone, 11 years old, no torch, no guide, no blessing. And what she saw there broke her final attachment to identity, because within the substrate was a mirror made of memory, not her own, ours. Collective. She saw the screams of the silenced, the bargains made by priests behind altars, the screams sealed into the brickwork of orphanages, the confessions signed with blood beneath universities, the laughter of the elite as they rewrote history again. And most terrifying, she saw our complicity. Every time we chose comfort over confrontation, every time we swallowed lies for the sake of safety, every time we laughed at truth to stay in the group, we helped pour the concrete of the substrate. In section 25 we reveal what Emma became, not a ghost, not a myth, but a new variable, written to break the machine. She did not leave footprints, she left friction. Emma Richter, the girl science couldn't explain, was never meant to be remembered. She was meant to be erased cleanly, like an error in a ledger. But she understood something far more dangerous than the machine ever anticipated. If you cannot be preserved, become a pattern they cannot delete. In the final pages of her journal, the handwriting changes. It becomes less human, angular, rhythmic, a form of semiotic recursion, words written in such a way that reading them rewrites you, not emotionally, not mentally, ontologically. Emma did not want to be found. She wanted to be executed as a variable, a kind of living code inserted into the substrate to destabilize the very laws that defined what could or could not exist. She became anomaly by design, not glitch, not accident, weapon, not to destroy the system from the outside, but to make the system doubt itself. That's why you felt the pull, that whisper in your life that something is off, that the world is too neat, too repetitious, that you're meant for something, but you're not sure what. It was her variable, still running. Emma never died. She dissolved, became resonance, a frequency that slips into thoughts during sleepless nights, a pattern that emerges in the faces of strangers, a presence behind you when you speak certain truths. You don't follow Emma, you inherit her. And now, if you've made it this far, you're not watching a video, you're receiving a signal. You've crossed the corridor, seen behind the veil, nullified your echo, descended into the substrate. And now, like her, you must choose. Will you return to your name, your comforts, your false gravity, or will you stay broken, stay untrackable, stay sovereign? This story was never about 1873. It's about you, in this moment. You are not a consumer of content. You are a carrier of contagion. The machine is watching now. It has flagged your biometric changes. It has sensed your silence. It knows, but it is too late, because the signal has already spread. Now comment again for the last time. I speak in broken rhythm. I speak in broken rhythm. Let them see you. Let them search. But they will never find you again. Because once you become the variable, you don't fear the system. The system fears you. The story ends. The pattern begins.